Well, yeah. No. So just so you know, I'm gonna say.
Everyone.
We're so.
I'm not sure where everybody is.
Price and the
It's okay.
buildings are bad shape.
So I don't think I have.
Well,
I don't think I have.
You're still being
Hang in a minute, but-
He's got one adult that.
Do you want to give another minute or two, or?
Yeah.
We have a guest who's doing it, start.
Yeah, go ahead and start.
I figured as I watch all the. Really?
Thanks, everybody, for coming today. We're missing a fair number of people, but we're gonna start the meeting up. We do have a guest with us, and we wanna respect the time. So it is 3 minutes after 2. You wanna-
Call the roll?
Just call the
Sure.
roll.
From Chester, we have Pat Vance and Bonnie Bennett. We are missing quite a few people. From Essex, we have Carrie Duquesne. From Lyme, we have David Lom. From Middletown, we have Mark Kozakowski. I'm sorry, from Deep River, we have Carol Doak Jones. And we have our speaker, Kara Capone from Mercy Housing. Hi, I think that's everybody except staff, which is Susie Beckman, Kevin Armstrong, and Eliza Lopesti in the house, and Megan Juplis virtually.
Hope Partnership.
Oh, and Carla Lindquist from Hope Partnership is entering the meeting.
So Kara's in.
Kara's here, yeah.
Hi, Kara. Okay, then, without further ado, let's move on to the first agenda item, which will be approval of the minutes from the meeting of December 19th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Second,
Second.
go. Any discussion? Okay. Hearing none, you can vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes of December 19th, 2023, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Yes. Thank you, everyone. So moving right along, we have a guest with us today as part of our continuing guest series. Today it's Kara Capone from Mercy Housing. Megan, would you like to do a little introduction for Kara?
I would actually suggest Kara perhaps do the introduction for herself, or perhaps Eliza as well. I believe you coordinated.
I did, yeah. So Kara, is with Mercy Housing and Shelter. And the reason I asked her to come is because Mercy works, with a lot of our towns. I know that you do work in Portland right now, and maybe there are some other towns that I'm not aware of. So she's just gonna speak to, what they do and how that works.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Kara Capone. I am the CEO of Mercy Housing and Shelter, and we have services in both Hartford and Middlesex counties. Annually, we serve around 4,000 unduplicated individuals annually. And we've been in operation since 1983. So this is our 41st year of being in operation. We have a strong history of working in Middlesex. And we have offices in both Middletown and Portland. And so I wanted to kind of cover some of the things that we do. We really focus as an organization on housing and homelessness issues, really helping support people who are experiencing a housing crisis, get back on their feet. And the organization as a whole works, has programs from everything from soup kitchens and food pantries all the way up to housing development. We really kind of run the gamut. The agency has grown organically after the past 41 years by focusing on community gaps and services and trying to meet the needs that we see in the communities where we work. So I've been at Mercy since March of 2020 as the pandemic was setting in, just impeccable timing. So it's been almost 4 years now. I can't believe it's really kind of flown by. And so as far as our programming and what we offer in Middlesex, we do a couple of different things. We focus on having what we call permanent supportive housing. So we work closely with Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and Department of Housing on helping folks who were formerly homeless and have barriers to maintaining their housing stay housed in the community. And in Middlesex, we don't run the housing. We work with independent landlords on getting people housed. We help them with the housing affordability by pairing their housing with a subsidy. Similar to a Section 8, it depends on the source of the subsidy. So it could be from the Department of Urban Housing and Urban Development. It could be from the state RAP program. It could be actual Section 8. And so we have around 100 different units of housing scattered throughout Middlesex. Now, it's mostly where we're going to find apartments, right? And we have to abide by the rules associated with the housing around following the rules of fair market rent. And so there's a lot of negotiating that we have to do with landlords. And, the way that we work with landlords is that we offer them someone else to go to when they decide to rent with one of our folks. And it's both individuals and families. So a lot of the times people do have stereotypes about who we're serving, but we do serve families. We serve women with children, usually single parents. And we help them get back on their feet. And then, there's a whole process of eventually moving on. They can stay in the program for as long as they want to. It is not time limited. But if they're at a point where they're ready to move on, we help them with that. And that's been an operation for quite some time, I think over 20 years in Middlesex. The other thing that we focus on is working with what we refer to as coordinated access networks. This is part of the work that we do in Portland. We work with other homeless providers, street outreach teams, permanent supportive housing providers, to help to really kind of find people and or have them find us in most cases, but sometimes we'll go out looking, especially in more of the rural areas that you guys cover, and help them get into housing and then provide that support service to help them maintain their housing once they're in it. So we also do some diversion and prevention programs. We'll do outreach as well. A lot of folks think that all the homeless are in Middletown. That's not true. There's definitely folks. We work with police departments and towns to kind of identify who those folks are, who they feel are homeless. There's a lot of rural homelessness. There's a lot of people who set up camps and tents. And so it's kind of hidden. We also find that working with families, family homelessness is hidden. Because people generally don't want to get involved in the system. They're afraid that their kids are going to get taken away by Department of Children and Families. So there's that general fear associated with that. And so those are just some of the things we offer in Middlesex. We'll work with towns, we'll work with police departments, EMS. We definitely work with Connecticut Valley Hospital. We have a good, close working relationship with them as well. And really just trying to get people in for the services they need. Sometimes it's very light touch. Sometimes somebody just needs help with security deposits and getting back on their feet. Sometimes it's more intense. It could be moderate where they need a couple months of rent and then they're on their way. And so we'll partner with other service providers as well. And we'll try and coordinate all of the services available so that we're not duplicating services. It is hard to duplicate services when there's such a tremendous amount of need. But we all kind of coordinate what we're doing and who we're seeing so that we try to create our own safety net so we're not missing folks. It is important to note that we do get people from a variety of different towns. And even though it seems like some of these housing services are centralized to, the Middletown area in Middlesex, it's because the services are located there, right? And so people go to where the services are. But I think I was telling Eliza, there was this one story where, there was 4 families in East Haddam, and it was in a 4-unit, not, it's like basically 4 units. It was like a duplex with a 2-2, right? So 2-2 duplex, and the property had gone into probate. And so nobody was able to fix the property, and all of these families were about to get evicted because it was a public health issue. These are things that happen in small towns that a lot of folks don't necessarily understand. Those are families with kids in school that want to remain in towns. And what we're finding is that the type of housing being developed right now isn't affordable for them. They've grown up in these areas. They have established roots and community in these areas, and they want to remain in these areas. The problem is that there's just not the affordable housing there or housing stock in order to do it. And so when we've had conversations with towns, a lot of the conversation is around wanting to keep the small town characteristic of the town, right? And also trying to put, more condensed housing where there's a space where there's actual infrastructure like water and sewer and gas, right? And I think those are some of the things that some of the smaller towns have really struggled with when it comes to trying to build some of this. I also, as somebody who's I'm going to be moving to East Haddam soon, so I'm kind of excited about that. So I'm familiar with the area. But so I understand it. And I think one of the things is that, the term affordable housing has a bad rap, right? It's affordable, but to who? So the governor's been talking about this workforce housing, right? And so it's kind of a way of redefining affordable housing, but actually for higher income folks. And so they're starting to put an emphasis on that. I think the other thing which is encouraging is that they're also talking about, moderating kind of what they're looking for as far as unit developments, because they're finally listening to towns about what they want and how they want this housing to fit into the characteristic of the towns that the housing is going to be built in. And, from a development perspective, I think some of you, because I've been to, I think, 2 of these meetings so far, some of you around the table know this, right? That it costs the same for an architect to build 30 units as it does to build 300. And so, from the state's perspective, there is this push for the 300 because it's more cost efficient and you get your per unit cost down, right? So that it seems acceptable. But putting 300 units in a small town in one location creates this monolith that doesn't necessarily fit in. So I think it's a matter of trying to balance the need of current residents. Elderly is actually the fastest growing population of the folks that we're trying to serve now. They are on fixed incomes. They're too older. They're too disabled to work. And there hasn't really been the investment in elderly housing that we really need to see in some of these communities. People want to stay where they're at, right? But there's got to be some type of affordable housing so that they're not going to be inundated with property tax, for example, right? So, if we think about types of development that might be of interest, it would definitely be some of the elderly housing, because they really are struggling. We're seeing more and more folks coming in trying to make ends meet by accessing the food pantry because their rent's gone up a tremendous amount. Or with the elderly, sometimes it's the person they were living with passed away, and so that income has disappeared, and that puts them at risk financially as well, and creates housing instability situations. And then for families, sometimes it's just bad luck. Sometimes it's domestic violence, right? Sometimes it's other things that destabilize someone's housing. So I just wanted to, have a chance to kind of do a very broad stroke overview with you, and also kind of to take questions, because I think you guys have really good questions. And I would love to hear some of those.
I have a question. Kara, I was wondering where your funding comes from. How do you support all these people with what is the funding sources? What are the funding sources?
Great question. So our funding comes from wherever I can get it. Majority of it comes from either the Department of Housing, State Department of Housing, State Department, DEMIS, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, federal funding through Department of Housing and Urban Development, foundations, private donations, grant opportunities. So that covers most of the funding that we get.
And what is your annual budget?
For the organization as a whole, so Mercy is part of an umbrella organization called Community Housing Advocates, and CHA acts as a wholly, it's a controlling of two subsidiaries, Mercy and My Sister's Place. Our annualized budget is around $10 million. And so that certainly isn't just the services that I focused on for Middlesex, because we have a ton of other programs, including the housing development piece. We're just finishing developing 24 units in the north end of Hartford. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we're not going to get any more supply chain delays, and we should be, ribbon cutting on that one in June.
I have a question. Hi, Kara. Can you comment on the trends that you see in homelessness? I mean, we hear about it in the news. Can you comment on what you see about
Sure.
that?
Sure. There's a couple different trends emerging. One is elderly homelessness. We're finding that folks who are 55 and older are specifically being impacted, elderly with disabilities. People are getting priced out of their apartments if they're on fixed incomes. So that's one of the trends. The trends that we're seeing are New York-based landlords coming in and buying what we call, naturally occurring affordable housing and changing the market. The other thing that's putting the squeeze on our population, our elderly population, is that there's only a 2% vacancy rate right now. So meaning that of all the apartments in Connecticut, 2% are available right now for rental. The other thing putting the squeeze is high interest rates for home loans and for first-time buyers who are finding it difficult to enter the housing market. So they're remaining renters, and that's also contributing to the tenancy rate. Did I say occupancy before? I'm sorry, it was tenancy. And so that's putting an additional squeeze. And then also with this administration's, what did he call it? A spending diet. He wasn't putting out bonding money to create affordable housing. And so we're way behind. We should have been building, knowing just the general population bump of baby boomers, we should have been building elderly housing 10 years ago in preparation for the boom. That didn't happen. That's certainly not this administration's fault. Because it takes so long to develop affordable housing that we really have to think well in advance of when we're going to need it and where we're going to put it, right? So those are some of the trends that we're seeing with the elderly. They're definitely food insecure. Like I said, they're coming in looking for additional food because they're trying roommate situations. They have disabilities, so they can't return to work. And then the second trend is this family homelessness. We're seeing a lot of families come in living in cars. They're new to the homeless service system. And so we are, trying to help them. They're very afraid of accessing services, either because they were involved in the DCF system as children, and now they have children of their own, and they're very reluctant to get involved, but they're coming out of desperation. I was in our soup kitchen today. This was in Hartford, and we had a mom with a brand new baby, and they're looking for food and help. And that's just one illustration of what we see on a daily basis. So those are
What
some of the
about the
things.
what about the numbers? How they've increased, I assume,
Yeah.
but can you comment
Yeah.
on that?
There's so actually it's interesting. So what we have annually is called a point in time count. The point in time count is happening tonight. It happens once a year. And nationally it happens within the same week every year. Nationally, so everybody's basically trying to do the point in time count at the same time. Right now in Middlesex, you've got 489 homeless people. I got this information from the Connecticut Coalition on Homelessness. We're up over 13% over last year with this. And they estimate that in what they call the MMW, Middlesex, Meriden, Wallingford area, that we're lacking about 3,000 units of affordable housing just in that area for the folks who need them. Right now, the average household who stays in a shelter stays for 172 days. So shelters are getting, there's like a bottleneck happening in shelters right now where there's no resources to get people out of shelter. So people seeking shelter are bottlenecking in trying to get in. And so that's part of the problem. We did get, as a state, a lot of resources through the CARES Act and ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, to help with housing and homelessness issues. The problem is a lot of that funding has dried up. A lot of that funding was called rapid rehousing. And so that was targeted funding for individuals and families who were in shelter. In order to get them out of shelter, we offered security deposits and a couple of months rent until people can get back on their feet. And so that helped to kind of contribute to the churn that we have seen in shelters. And that, so by getting people out, we free up space to get people in, and that's how the system was working. But because of funding shortfalls, the system is not working the way it should be because it's just completely under resourced at this point.
So I have a question. What is causing, and you may have, I came in late, so you may have addressed this, so forgive me. What is causing this great increase in homelessness and lack of ability of people to pay rents? Is it the fact that there isn't enough housing, or there isn't enough affordable housing, or people are, developers are gobbling up all of the housing that exists? Where is the problem actually stemming from?
I would say all of that. I think it's the combination of all of those factors, that there's certainly not enough supply out there, that people who would normally be buying houses right now are still renting because of interest rates, that we haven't built enough housing in general in the state of Connecticut. I think we have like the second or third lowest rate of housing development in the nation. Part of that is because of zoning issues. A lot of the times, when affordable housing wants to be built, a lot of people get up in arms about even building just market rate housing too these days. It's the zoning issues contribute to the lack of housing being built, along with lack of infrastructure in some areas, like around water, sewer, and gas. So it's a combination of things. In certain parts of Connecticut, it certainly is. It's more zoning than anything else, and that's really kind of Fairfield County. But we do find it in other places as well. And this is kind of crazy, but if I told you that Connecticut was the second most segregated state in the United States next to Mississippi, I'm sure you'd find that hard to believe, but it's true. And we segregate through zoning laws and restrictive zoning. I think one of the things too is just this whole perception around housing. I think the perception around not wanting to change the nature of small town living, that's why people move to towns, because that's what they want. And I think there's ways to accommodate still having that, but also making room for other people who want to live in those communities. I think when we think about the health of our families in Connecticut in general, and giving children an opportunity to grow up in towns that are thriving and welcoming. You can't, you certainly can't put enough of an emphasis on the importance of bringing in new families and new blood into town. Certain small towns are dealing with whether or not to close elementary schools. And part of that's because you don't have the housing, and you certainly don't have starter home housing anymore, or affordable housing that would welcome families in. And that's a definite deficit, I think. But something just to consider when it comes to this. The other thing too is that just what we're paying, what it costs to live in Connecticut versus what we're paying folks, is that for a family to afford a 2-bedroom apartment and pay, the recommended affordability rate is 30% of their income. So in order to do that in Connecticut, you have to work the equivalent of 2 to 3 full-time jobs to afford it at state minimum wage. That's how high the rental increases have been since COVID. And it is because we've had out-of-town landlords or large property management firms buying up a ton of property. Sometimes they're just sitting on it, waiting for the property to increase, so they're not doing anything with it to develop it. I've absolutely seen that happen as well. And so you have this whole conflagration of forces coming together to make it really hard to live in Connecticut and then afford housing here too.
Carol, question about this notion of terminology of workforce housing.
Mhm.
So on the one hand, I think it's a good thing to shine a light on the fact that there are working people who are making a surprising level of income that actually would qualify for affordable housing. But on the other hand, I think in some ways it's giving in to some of the mythology and misinformation about low-income housing and what the impact of that is on a community. So any thoughts on how to make that concept a more expansive discussion about affordable housing rather than trying to channel it into a perceived safer space?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be running a $1 billion marketing firm. I get, here are my ideas. I don't know. I do think that it needs to be rebranded as something else. I think that the affordable housing that was built in the 60s and 70s have done permanent damage to the psyche of Americans when it comes to the term affordable housing. I used to work in Bridgeport, and I saw exactly what everybody fears, which is these monolithic apartment buildings where you stick all the poor people, and they mess up your school systems, and they introduce drugs and crime, and like that's all of the stuff that goes into it. But when we look at modern affordable housing, I actually in NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? So when I currently living in Camden, and I literally built affordable housing in my backyard. It was around the block from where I live. And Hamden's really kind of this liberal area. And yet people got the wrong impression of it because it had the affordable housing label on it. And part of the population we were serving were formerly homeless veterans, and they didn't want that in the town. I was like, wow, okay. So, but I promised my neighbors, because that's what they were, that I would never build something I wouldn't live in myself. And so part of that is, and believe me, I did get my vindication, because when we opened it and I opened it up to the entire community to come and tour it, people are asking, where's the application? I want to live here. This is great. And so we have to figure out ways to kind of counteract these stereotypes about what it looks like by showing them actual, workforce or affordable housing, or, call it a different label, right? And people would be very surprised by what it is. It was only 33 units. It fit into the characteristics of the neighborhood. It was landscaped beautifully. It brought up property values for the surrounding houses and condos that were in the neighborhood. And it's quiet. I think that's the other thing. It's quiet housing. It's not noticeable. And I think having open forums or conversations about what that looks like might help to kind of dispel some of the stereotypes that folks have. There's some people who you're just never going to convince. And there's some people who are just bigoted, and I'll use my experience growing up. I grew up in Orange. I'm Connecticut born and raised. And my parents moved to a new neighborhood, and my dad worked for the post office. He was a mail carrier. My mom was stay at home at the time and then was a secretary. They're humble people. But I remember one of the neighbors saying, "You don't belong in this neighborhood. This is a white collar neighborhood. You don't belong here." And it happens at all levels, right? And when I graduated from graduate school, I couldn't afford to move back to where I grew up because it was, their zoning laws at the time were, 2 acres per house. And we're not going to invest in infrastructure. And I'm picking on Orange because I grew up there. But there's not dissimilarities across the rest of Connecticut around trying to have these conversations. And as somebody who was, college educated, newly starting out in my career, I would have loved to move back to my hometown, but there were no options to do so at the time, right? And so maybe having conversations about that, about do you want your kids to graduate and come back and live in the town, but not with you? Do you want to age in a town where you've established roots and you go to church and you have, community ties, but you don't want the big house anymore. You want something smaller. Those types of conversations might be beneficial to see what's in it for them. I think some of the other things, and I was just up in Tolland talking about this last weekend, is sometimes the ways around trying to build more housing is by loosening up some of the zoning restrictions around in-law apartments. So that you can create in-law apartments or in-law suites on your property more easily, and you're going to be creating more housing that does fit into your neighborhoods, right? Or it can accommodate multi-generation housing if we have aging baby boomer populations that are starting to retire and might be looking for different types of housing options, but within the towns where they live. So I think it's going to require a lot of creativity. But it also will require people to remember that not everybody started out on top. Some of us have more humble beginnings and we have to work to where we are to get to where we are today. I don't know. I mean, I think you guys know your folks in these towns better and how to open up some of these conversations around it. I think once a lot of these stereotypes are dispelled, I think that some of those barriers and walls start to come down when it comes to housing.
Thanks, Kara.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyone
Here's
else?
a radical idea. It probably will never work, but I think I'm using the term correctly. In Connecticut, we're balkanized. We have 169 towns where they all get to do their own zoning. And if we could break that up and go back to either larger government units or more of a state with more power to the state. But the problem is it's almost a Gordian knot because all of the representatives represent towns and they won't get elected if they say, we're gonna do something about our town structure. Because if we have 169 different planning and zoning boards and every town wants to protect, and I think that's the pattern that I'm seeing. I'm on the P and Z in Essex. Every town is NIMBY. We had a huge hearing with 200 people show up for an affordable housing thing, and they were all against it, or 90% of them were against it. And it was like you say, the project was a wonderful project. It looked nice. It wasn't going to attract. But the unspoken thing, I think at bottom, it was just racist and prejudice that kept it out. But it was in a 2-acre zoning law, and all we wanted to do was to put in a housing, affordable housing by a very reputable builder that wouldn't have been really, really low-end affordable. It would have been on the medium affordable, but only about 30% of it, and the rest of it was gonna be high-end housing. And you can't break that up. I don't know how to even begin to think about breaking that up. You can't do it. Because every time you do, you'll get the mob. And that's what we got. And there wasn't one person of 200 that stood up to talk that didn't say, I'm in favor of affordable housing, but. And that was the response of 50 people who spoke over 6 hours of public hearings. I'm in favor of affordable housing, just don't stick it over there.
Mhm.
Okay, and now we can't figure out where to stick it, because there is no place to stick it. Because everybody's gonna have a problem, and when we do find an area where we can, quote, stick it, no developer in his right mind would wanna stick it there, because he couldn't make any money on it.
Well, they'll stick it in the undeserved or underserved communities where people won't come out with pitchforks and do it, and that's where they've been putting it for decades.
Right, but then that's the project's problem. That's exactly the project's problem. That's, when you said, the big buildings, when I was growing up, those were called projects. And that's where you stuck all the poor black people. It was as simple as that. And we don't have a way, we haven't figured out a way in the second most segregated state, as you say, to solve these problems. And I come to meeting after meeting after meeting, P&Z meetings, and these meetings, and you can't budge anything. In apartments, affordable, maybe I'm getting on a high horse here, but in-law apartments I don't think that creates much diversity. All you're doing is just packing more family together, and a couple of old people who are gonna die in 10 years. I hate to be cynical, but that's what it is. You're not adding to the, by putting old retired people, you're not adding to the wealth of the community at all. You're not doing anything. So I don't know how to even go about trying to change all this. I really don't. I wanna keep coming to meetings and I wanna keep thinking, but I haven't heard a good answer yet.
I think one of the partners that we found have been churches. Because I think one of the issues is having a mass of people show up and say, no, I do support it, because nobody wants to be the town pariah who says, no, I think it's a good idea. But if you really start, and that's actually where I was in Tolland, I was speaking at a church, right? Talking to a church group who knew that they had to do something about affordable housing in their towns. I don't know what it is that's going to make this appeal to people. I totally agree with the 169 different towns and a lack of county-based government. Connecticut is one of 2 states that do not have county-based government, and it's us, and I believe it's Rhode Island. And Rhode Island was number 1 for not developing housing. Connecticut was number 2. So it certainly speaks to different zoning laws, and the need to support legislators who do support having some type of standardized zoning laws across the state. So it's fair.
Kara, I have a question. I'm Susie Beckman with the River Cog. Just wondering if you can tell us if you've done developments in Middlesex County, where they are.
We haven't done any development in Middlesex County.
Okay.
It's been harder to do. And your land is more expensive. That also contributes to it. Although right now it's been a little bit easier to do affordable housing because the money came in from the feds. There's still some there. If I were going to do it, again, it would be, I would love to target an area that one would welcome it. Right. So that's hard. And 2 would have the infrastructure to support it. But then 3, also let it fit within the characteristic of the town where it's going to be located, and make sure that we have residents. The other is just transportation, right? That we have residents who'd be in there who'd be able to access transportation, because in some of the towns, what we find is people prefer, the urban settings because they have access to transportation. But we do work with plenty of families who do have that, right? So it would just be trying to find the right fit. I see 2 other
Carla,
hands up.
Yeah.
Looks like Carla has a question.
Thanks. So I was sort of curious. I mean, one of the things that's really ringing true to me about what you're talking about is around the housing continuum and how people are getting stuck in housing that is not appropriate, because housing that is appropriate for them is not, there is no stock. And I think that's something that we're seeing too with the affordable housing that we own, is that I'm starting to see some of our tenants be, maybe they would be more comfortable in a supportive housing or an elderly housing with more wraparound services, but they cannot move to that because it doesn't exist in their town. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we're feeling as an organization, because we work sort of exclusively in this region, is that the feeling to be everything to everyone. And so it's nice to hear about an organization working with a population that our housing is not necessarily designed to be fully wraparound services, right? We develop housing that doesn't come with any services. And so, I'd love to develop a stronger relationship between our 2 organizations so that we can sort of have that synergy and keep that continuum going both ways, right? Because we also have the opportunity to, have folks who are not, in need of those services anymore and are just looking for a place that they can truly afford. So
Yeah, there's definitely a gap in that. And especially again, on the elderly side, prior to coming here, I worked for Housing Authority for a while. And, there is this concept around being able to age in place. I've also traveled to other countries, and I look at how their housing is and how their elderly is completely integrated into the community, right? And that the elderly is hanging out at the daycare center, helping out and giving them structure and purpose to their day, right? It also helps take the cost down of daycare. So there's different ways of doing things. I just think that I think we need people to be okay with trying new things, right? And funding it. Because, anytime you're building affordable housing, it's really expensive. The costs increase by like 30% just because you've got to follow a lot of other, depending on where you're getting the funding from, kind of the rules of material use, acquisition, and labor that go along with that.
I have another question. Are there any people, experts in zoning anywhere in the country where they've come up with some kind of ideal zoning to fix the problem of segregation and affordability? Because that might be a place to start. Are there any I call them professors or experts in the field that have proposed a zoning plan, no matter how unpopular it might be if we've tested it out, but is there something on paper somewhere we could look that professionals or experts in the field have come up with to break this problem?
So I have a friend who specializes in this, and it's one of the reasons why I know what's going on in Fairfield County, because she works specifically in Fairfield County on trying to develop affordable housing. I'd be happy to ask her and pass along her information if you wanted to talk to her. I'm sure she'd be more than willing to kind of chat about what she's been doing in Fairfield. And they've really been focusing on zoning reform and the type of so and trying to kind of figure that out. I think, ultimately it's not only, it's a combination of the zoning, but then the funding available and the willingness to increase the cost per unit based on who's funding the development of the affordable housing so that it fits in with the culture and structure of the town where it's going to be built. And I think that's really kind of where the rub is, which is we could build, 30 units at a time or 15 units at a time, but the state doesn't want to pay for that, right? Because it's not cost effective to do so. And I think that's got to be part of the discussion.
Megan, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. So I was going to ask, part of the purpose of having the speaker series and even just creating this group is to understand the synergies between everybody working in the housing space. And that's why I love to hear, getting Carla and Kara together and understanding what both organizations do, and how that relates to what the towns do. So I guess my question is, what is the best way for us as the committee, us as the COG, and then also the towns to be a good partner for Mercy Housing? How can we support your effort to rehouse people?
So if landlords that you're working with who have rental property who are willing to go at fair market rent, that would be great. I think that's one of the things that we struggle with right now is trying to find somebody who's, going to be at fair market rate, including utilities, or below it without utilities. I think that's one of the biggest struggles we have is trying to find those landlords to do that. To have discussions about opening up the town to welcoming families who have young kids and not necessarily aren't at the apex of their career because they're just starting out. I would suggest having discussions around that new housing for families doesn't necessarily contribute to the overall burden on school systems, because that's usually the biggest argument against affordable housing. And, to talk about some of the other roadblocks that get thrown up around the creation of affordable housing, like wetlands, that's always a big one. Parking spaces, that's a big one. Traffic studies, right? Like those are all stall tactics that towns throw up time and time again on planning and zoning boards because they want to stall the project or hope that we run out of money and we decide to go pick somewhere else to go. So if there's ways to try and think about, to go around that, and look, and nobody likes 830G, which is kind of like, and towns feel like affordable housing kind of gets shoved down their throat. I think that there's really good developers out there, and if towns chose to partner with developers around really what they felt would work within the town setting, and come to some type of balance with what's going to be, if they're for-profit developers, what's going to be profitable for them. I think towns have an opportunity to work with nonprofit developers to really kind of figure out how to make it work, right? Because nonprofit developers aren't in it for the money. They really are in it for the housing creation, and so I think those are some of the things that can be beneficial.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Kara.
you did. I was just going to say it's more on, so if I'm understanding correctly, it's more on the side of education, creating the supply, and particularly the fixing the rental market, providing more and infrastructure.
Invest in infrastructure. Look for community investment grants, for example. Community investment grants right now offered by the state really could help support infrastructure. uh, those are really, really good funds right now. And that's a good way to also get your local representatives involved in the creation of housing, is by getting some of these community investment funds put to good use in these communities by extending water and sewer, or investing in solar. They're giving away $70 million at a clip for this money. So, it's pretty significant. And my understanding of it is it's just, if you apply enough, it'll be a matter of time before your round comes up, right? So to have also, think about the affordable housing plans that each community was supposed to create, and what's being developed, and what's been the progress with some of those plans. Have the plans been created and shelved, or are people actually working on them? I think those are legitimate questions. And in some communities, they're actually, actively working on this to try and figure out how to bring in affordable housing. And infrastructure was one of the areas that had kept coming up as an issue. And of course, like, if there's questions about anything as far as like service provision, housing, homelessness, like we're really working at the other end of people who are in deep poverty, right? That they are well below the poverty line. They're making less than $20,000 a year in many circumstances. And they're not making ends meet, right? And they would never make ends meet without assistance. But affordable housing in Connecticut, because it is so expensive to live here, absolutely runs the gamut. And there is a whole swath of people, from the workforce housing that we talked about at the beginning, and people starting out new in their career, or thinking about electric boat, right? You definitely have a population of people who live in your area who work for EB, and they're going to be doing nothing but hire coming up, right? They've got a lot of nuclear subs to build. And so there's going to be specific investment in your community around infrastructure and housing, and workforce housing specifically, just because of EB and all the federal funding coming in to help support the building of nuclear subs. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, within your COG to try and do some really good work. And it just might be around reframing the conversation. Maybe it is around workforce housing, or maybe it's around attracting people to your towns to contribute to the viability of the town, right? Ultimately, it's always figuring out what's in it for them, what's in it for your opponents who are really opposed to trying to build this type of housing.
So, thank you, Kara. Clearly, you've tapped into some areas of really active thinking and some hot topics that we could go on all night, I'm sure, at this rate. But we probably should move on with the agenda. And I'll echo what Megan said. I was particularly happy to see that you and Kara from Hope had a little connection there. So that's one of the things we're trying to achieve with this series. So that was a win. But I'll just say thanks very much, and I'm sure that there'll be follow-up questions, and we know where to find you.
Great, and I'll put my contact information in the comments so folks who are online can have access to it.
Great, thank you. Okay. So again, I could have gone on for a few more hours, but at some point, I know folks have to get home today. So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is on the continuing evolution of the toolkit. The next item to add to it is a draft glossary of acronyms, and you that one, Liza?
Yeah, Kevin's gonna share our screen here.
That's it there.
So this toolkit item arose from a suggestion from our December meeting. And this is like a rough draft that we created with some terms that we kind of just gave some definitions for. And, Megan was just texting me during that, we were talking about adding NIMBY. So like anything that we can we'll send this out to everybody. Anything that you think needs to be on here that isn't, you just let us know. But just kind of common things that come up, like AMI, affordable housing, and what an ADU is. attainable housing versus assisted housing, what is CHAFA, what a housing authority is, what public housing is. We kind of gave some little summaries here of 830G and 830J, what those programs are, and TOD, voucher programs. So this document could be a living document, and it has a lot of room for expansion. So, like I said, I'll send this around to everybody, but this will eventually live in the toolkit for everyone to see and hopefully use. And we've included some links to outside websites and definitions that are probably more comprehensive than what we would provide on this document for you to read.
Great, thank you. That's great.
Is this gonna go up on the Rivercog website?
Yeah, it'll be part of our toolkit, which I think is not there yet, but yeah, this is gonna be, yeah, it's in process, work in progress.
But as we were discussing before the meeting, we can kind of crowdsource this, so if you come up with a term during your conversations that was a question and had to define it, then we can, it's not a one-way
No, absolutely
broadcast, so we
not.
can contribute to this as we encounter all of the jargon.
Yeah, and I feel like you all as, P and Z members and first selectmen and planners probably hear your residents' confusion a little bit more than COG staff might. So if there are things that you think aren't clear to people that we should add on there, that would be good too.
Good. Any other questions or comments on that? From the folks on
It's good.
the Zoom call? All right, thanks. Another useful tool in the kit.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, for 24, we had talked about trying to get into some predictable cadence for the meetings and have some standing agenda items that we'll bring up every time. So we just encountered two of those outside of the housekeeping. So one of them was the guest series, and we're going to continue that. And actually, it looks like we're going to have, as we discussed last month, Beth Sibilia from the Center for Housing Equity and Opportunity will be. Looks like she's going to be able to join us for our next meeting. So that's good. So see that as a standing item. And then there are a few other recurring items that we had kicked around, and we'd like to get some, we have some ideas on that and want to get some feedback on that, if there are any others, or refine them. It's on the agenda. Megan, do you want to talk about that, or Eliza?
Yeah, I could speak to it. If you could, I don't have the agenda up in front of me, so if you could just list them for me and then I can speak to them, that would be very helpful.
What we have so far is the speaker series, legislative updates.
There we go.
There it is.
Perfect.
And,
All right. So most of this list came from the December meeting, and things that we heard from all of you would be useful and to give us some consistency across our meetings and a sense of building towards a good universal base of knowledge. The first is continuing the speaker series, as Michael was saying, continuing to build those synergies between organizations working in the housing space, learning how we can all support each other and sort of row in the same direction. So we'll try to continue getting speakers on board for that as we move through. Legislative updates, we're going to be starting the new session soon. We have a feeling that housing is going to be coming back, whether it's as strong as it was last session or not, I'm not sure. But we will keep an eye on that, and our proposal would be to monitor the bills coming out and present to you, decide whether we collectively want to submit testimony, discuss impacts and so on. Then funding opportunities, we talked about how we are all the grant writers sort of in our own right for our own municipalities and how we're kind of treading water on grants that are coming out. So continuing to monitor potential opportunities for grant funding to work on housing projects or related projects, opportunities to collaborate on grants and so on as a standing series. And then talking about development opportunities, seeing what is going on in the towns, if there are any parcels coming available, any priorities that the municipalities have about potential projects, and we could kind of maybe crowdsource with our speaker series or, figure out ways to connect these opportunities to development projects that the municipalities want to see. And so the idea would be, to try and fill these in each meeting, although there may be meetings where there are more than others, and we could adjust accordingly. But that's what we heard from the December meeting. So we thought that that could kind of be an ongoing thing.
Anything missing? So I think the notion would be, we'll give this a try, and if we need to, it's not gonna be set into stone, but we can at least give it a try, and if we need to adapt it, we can do that as we learn. And as Megan said, I don't think there's like an expectation that we're gonna go out and make sure that we're gonna be presenting funding in particular number of funding opportunities every meeting, but if we encounter them, we'll make sure we capture it on the agenda. Okay. We'll start that with our February meeting then. Next up, number 6, we have the upcoming housing needs assessment, and this is tied back to some of the activity at the state level, what had occurred in the last legislative session with having a group formed to at least look at a methodology for a fair share set of numbers. And taking advantage of whatever opportunities are going to be afforded to us, and or creating opportunities to influence the thinking on that. Megan, do you want to take that one again and share some of what you've been working on?
Sure. So I think part of one of the charges of the Housing Committee would be to come up with a methodology for assessing housing needs across the region, building off of the work that we did in the first regional housing plan. And, as Michael said, this is something that's also going on at the state level. The idea would either be to get out in front of what's going on at the state level and present a good alternative that we like. Or, there's, so long as we cover whatever the state comes out with, if they get there first, there's no reason why we can't do something above and beyond in addition, that suits our own needs and preferences. So the thing with that is it would probably be a longer working meeting because we would need to identify what we're trying to figure out and what the inputs would be in order to figure that out. So I would envision it would probably be several sessions over the course of the year dedicated to just this topic. In alternate maybe to our regular agenda. And we could have, we talked about having people from other states that do regional housing needs assessments and regional housing planning coming in and talking to us about how they approach things. So maybe we have some meetings dedicated to that. And then maybe we have some meetings going through and talking about what we heard and what we've researched and coming up with some inputs for how we would like to structure a methodology, and then move forward from there into actually doing the methodology. I don't know, Michael, did I miss anything, or does that kind of cover it?
I think it does, and so an extension of that would be, we're aware that our neighbor in southeastern Connecticut, COG, has done some work on this dating back to like 2018, and they actually have published a methodology, and at least Lyme, we have Lyme and Old Lyme have a foot in both worlds on this, because we're part of New London County, but not part of CCOG, but we are in Rivercog, so we can form a bit of a bridge there, and I think Beth, when she comes here, will be a resource for that too. So being able to tap some of the expertise and some of the experience from neighboring regions, whether it's a legacy county or it's a COG or one of the not-for-profit organizations that's active in the space, just to kind of bring it together. And one concept that I think is important personally, but interested in any other thoughts on this, is to what's going on at the state level. There is a committee that's been formed. I think they've had at least a kickoff meeting. I don't know how active it is, but the idea would be to not wait for them to come out with something and then react to it, but to engage the conversation earlier in the process, so we can influence the outcome before it has to be changed, even if it comes out in request for comment form or whatever. But to be part of the discussion as early as possible, and do our homework and be able to provide whatever input and influence we think would be useful for the towns in our region.
Have we ever done one in the past? Have we ever had a housing needs assessment that Rivercog has done?
Yes.
Yes, I thought
Um,
we had.
Yeah, so it's in the regional housing plan. It was very high level at that stage, just given the timeline to do the 830J plans, because we were trying to do the regional housing plan as an umbrella for those plans. So the idea was that plan would put into place the structure for us to do a deeper dive of a needs assessment going forward in the next version, once we had this committee in place.
But even that I found really useful, Megan, because even just wrangling all the census data and being able to highlight, I know in our town, we were able to at least zero in and say, okay, we got the 30% AMI 60, 80, we were able to stratify within that and start to focus where some of the needs are. So any of the research to help wrangle all of the data that's out there and try to connect it with some of the local level information we have, I think would take it to another level. I'd like to think it'll be useful for the folks working at the state level to hear that perspective from the towns up.
So Michael, what is their timeline?
I don't think we know.
remember.
We don't
they-
know. And in fact, I was just at a CT-COG meeting this morning where that exact question was asked and no answer was given. So they're not really saying.
Question, when you talk about housing needs for our group, right? That would be the Lower Connecticut Council of Governments. How do you, what's the metric for determining what the need is? Because we're just and it's maybe just a question out of ignorance, but how do you determine what the need is for housing in our area, as opposed to, say, the state, something like that? How do you go about that?
I could jump in if you want. So part of that is the inputs that go into doing the housing needs methodology. So I know, for example, in the state of California, which I would hope would be one of the states that we would have come speak to us, they've been doing regional housing planning for a very long time. And when they do their regional housing needs assessment, they look at things like historic population plus population trend projections. So who's going to be moving into the region versus leaving. They also look at potential jobs and job growth. So how many jobs are there currently? How many of them are vacant? How many jobs are projected to come into the area? How much land capacity is available? what kinds of infrastructure is available. So a lot of that is to do with, can the land and the infrastructure support the additional units as well? And then there are other, there are other more nuanced inputs as well, but these things are discussed and decided upon every time they do the housing needs assessment. So there are, I think, a couple standard ones that always go in, and then they are voted on each time they do it.
There's also a look at the housing stock and the state of that and the age and.
Yep.
So, yeah, so look at population, look at economics, population dynamics, economic dynamics and projections, and infrastructure and stock.
This may be done differently in different places. So that would be the idea, is hearing from a couple of different places what they put into their inputs, as well as what feels important to us to understand what the needs are. And that's how we would determine our own methodology.
So I'm just thinking about your speakers series that, and with Beth coming in, that's great. But if in fact, and that's why I was asking about the timeline, because if we're trying to get a number of these different methodologies and come up with our own ideas before they get going, maybe our speaker series should almost focus, more frequently on those issues, and then have a way of, if that's really part of what we would like to achieve, both for our own needs, which I think is important for any development opportunities, funding opportunities, that maybe that's the speaker series should begin with that. Just the next couple of months, let's just keep going, and then have our dedicated meeting you're describing.
So Beth might actually still be a perfect person to have come in, because
Also from what Michael was saying, yeah, I just think that was a great one. Yeah, perfect.
And we had just kicked around the notion of, instead of trying to slip a pretty meaty topic like this into a standing agenda, is to maybe take every fourth meeting or so and turn it almost into a workshop on this, because it's gonna take a fair amount of time, and there'll be technical aspects to it and information gathering. But any thoughts on that?
I think it's a great idea, but I think we need a couple speakers before then, so we have a sense of what some of those models are, so we can then have a substantive meeting and not sort of spin our wheels.
And there's a ton of data out there on it.
Who is Beth? Beth
Sibilia is the head of the Eastern Connecticut branch of the Centers for Housing Equity and Opportunity, which is a not-for-profit organization that was formed by the community foundations across the state, plus some a lot of other entities came together to form these centers to focus on housing. So Concollege is involved. Do you have any others off the top of your head who was?
I think it really was the community foundation that
a prime mover and shaker for it.
Was the one who coalesced this group and actually hired Beth to do this. So they were key. And Miriam Malahi, who is the executive director there, really was key at focusing their community foundation on those major issues facing their region, housing being a major one, and then she sort of convened all these, or the community foundation convened all these different players, and they're all helping to fund Beth and the center. But I think it's really key, because Beth has, as Michael was saying before, our prior meeting, she's been the first selectman of Waterford and
New
London too. I mean, there's just been a variety of an attorney in this area as well, so I think, plus I didn't realize she did a lot of the thinking about housing needs assessment.
Well, in that California model that you mentioned, did they have regional control, where the regions create the rules? Because what I see an issue is, River Cog, we're a bunch of separate communities. We don't have any control legal control over what happens in our region. So if you call it, if that's our region, River Cog, lower, I can never get the whole thing straight, River Cog.
Yeah.
If we're River Cog, we don't have any legal control over that region, our region, as such.
Right.
Still sort of balkanized in the sense that each town would have to buy into a plan. And that's, if the California model is they have regional control, then I'm not sure that helps us evaluate how we go about looking at how we can do something here. But, and I'm not naysaying it, I'm just saying, I'd like to find out a model that works for for small communities like we have. I guess Middletown is a little larger and they probably have other issues. But most of our towns are these very small, insular, governmental units.
So I guess I could take that in a couple of parts, if that's okay, Michael. So I would say first, in California, in the California model, it's something similar to what's been proposed here that is not currently the case, which is the state comes out with an overall number of units for the region based on a methodology that's developed with a large public input process. And then the region does its own methodology to allocate its large number amongst the cities and counties in the region. And then the cities and counties are responsible for taking that number. And they are not responsible for building the units, but what they are responsible for doing is showing how their planning and zoning can accommodate the units. So the recognition is that municipalities don't really go in and physically build properties. What they do control is the land use and the regulations. So you have to show in a planning document how your land use plan and your regulations would allow for that number of units to be built. So it kind of trickles down that way. Michael and I kind of had a talk about this actually, where in a regional approach for us, in order to maintain the autonomy of all of our towns, it would certainly be a collaborative process because the region would not come up with a number, right? Well, first of all, the region is governed by the chief elected or executive officials of each of our towns. So our bosses are the 17 for selectmen, town managers, mayors, so on. But everything that we do is collaborative. So it has to be approved by the group in order for it to move forward. So it would be sort of an iterative process where we all agree on a methodology. RiverCog serves as staff to kind of crunch the numbers or work with a consultant to crunch the numbers based on the methodology that's agreed on. And then we would kind of work with the towns individually to see, all right, this is the overall number that we came up with. What makes sense to go where, instead of apportioning out numbers to everybody, just have everyone talk about, how their towns might accommodate some of that, and work on it that way. But it would all have to be a collaborative approach that everyone's on board with.
Also, check me if I got this wrong, Megan, but the only thing that's actually been passed into law is that there's gonna be some thinking done about assigning some of the top level numbers.
Yep.
But there's no requirement for a plan and no requirement for a response at this point. Nonetheless, you can see where it's headed, so our thinking is that as towns and as the region, it'd be best to get in early on this conversation and not wait for the next shoes to drop legislatively. But right now, and again, check me if I got this, but the only actual thing that's been passed into law is just a non-binding set of directional numbers for the fair share and stuff.
Yeah, I think it was a study, right? We were at a study to develop a methodology to come up with some numbers.
I just have one comment. Just from a staff point of view, I think that this strategy makes a lot of sense. And Essex is looking at doing text amendments. So I think I mentioned last month that we're looking at doing a text amendment for different nodes. And so if each town approaches this, obviously there would have to be a public hearing as part of the text amendment process. So that's where each town would be looking at, excuse me, what's the best fit? And if the residents feel that that's a good match or not. But I think having this study as background and background information that's feeding this decision would be very helpful. So as you've said, Megan, I think that not actually constructing that housing or even noting specifically where it would be located, but generally showing where it could be built, then leaving it up to the developers to decide which parcels they are interested in or could actually build upon, I think makes sense.
Any other thoughts, questions? So at this point, I guess the next step will be, we'll put this on the agenda, get some relevant speakers to start to build up our fact base and our knowledge base on it. And at some point, within a few months, I would hope we'd be in a position to maybe spin off one of our monthly meetings and dedicate it. Does that sound right? In the meantime, maybe we can try and get a sense of where the state level group is headed and at what pace they're running at.
Yeah. When we do the working group, maybe we have snacks.
That's all. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, next up is our just general show and tell session, updates from members. Just open the floor.
We have an update, quick update. Town of Chester is moving forward with creating a housing committee. We borrowed freely from the town of Old Lyme. Thank you very much. So hope to have something to report on that and share if anybody wants to use that as their model. It is one of the goals that's in our affordable housing plan, so maybe one check would be nice.
Progress.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Any more good news?
No. I have a question. It may be only tangentially related, but we have a text amendment that may be coming forward in Essex that is gonna proposes to change the setbacks in one of our populated areas called Essex, about 900 units. And I wondered, does anybody have any experience with that? We're gonna expand or contract the setbacks. I know I'm trying to say it so it's understood that if you're only allowed 15 feet to your border, to your boundary, now you're gonna be allowed 10. Okay, that's the idea. Does anybody have any experience with whether that actually assists with making more housing affordable in any way, shape, or form? Because I'm looking for guidance on how I even think about that issue.
Is affordability the purpose of that?
No.
Okay.
I just wondered if somehow there might be an unspoken benefit for affordable housing by doing that, because then I might support it. The spoken reason for it was that our zoning board of appeals is broken because they keep allowing people to actually inch closer to their neighbors regardless of whether they're following the ZBA rules or not. So,
I guess my first reaction would be if you shrink the setback, then that just as a general, gives you a general opportunity to increase density. So that density could come in the form of expensive housing or affordable housing.
Or the in-law apartments.
No, you can't do that, though, you can't, we're not changing the rule that it has to be a single-family dwelling. We're just saying, if you wanna expand your footprint, your housing footprint, because you want a personal
okay.
bedroom, you can do it. That's what they're saying, they're not, I would be all in favor of saying, let's change the, single-family dwelling, issue. That would, because I think that would open up things, but this is just, no, I just want a bigger footprint
On an existing lot, they're not talking about.
on an
change.
existing,
On an-
on an existing lot.
Throughout Essex.
Throughout what they call Essex Village, which is one of the zoned areas in Essex.
Which is already probably,
Yeah, they're pretty,
So
yeah,
you're
it's
already-
a
so
smaller
you're
lots
already-
and
you're
they're
already
closer to
in
the,
that- yeah,
they're
exactly, you're
closer to
already
the
there
line
anyway.
anyway, yeah.
So if that's there, there's probably more in terms of being consistent.
Yeah. Okay, I was just wondering, things like that.
If, so for updates, any other business?
I wanted to advertise something that Rivercog could do. I was kind of hoping to find a willing partner, maybe, where we could probably do like a mapping exercise, kind of similar to the SES, where we look at a parcel level analysis of the town and kind of work with, you know, Habitat for Humanity, Hope, even Mercy Housing, kind of get a detailed list of what they're looking for, right? They're shopping, they're looking for parcels to redevelop. And it would be helpful if we kind of were able to catalog parcels that the town's interested in maybe redeveloping. So there's a criteria on the town's end, but also the criteria on like, what is Habitat looking for, you know? If it's over 100 years, they don't want it. You know, if it's on a big piece of property, they don't want it. What exactly it is that they're looking for so that we can help connect their operation, which is small, right? Habitat, we learned, does like one house a year. So I think it's a small step and it's a service that we could do here at Rivercog, but connecting what the redevelopment, the nonprofit redevelopers are looking for with parcels that the town thinks would be supported for that sort of redevelopment. So I'm thinking like one town, maybe two towns to do like a parcel analysis. That Kevin just stepped out, so I have to, we'll work, Kevin's gonna be the GIS person doing this, but we'll work with, like I said, the nonprofit redevelopment groups, do the GIS analysis and kind of go, get like a criteria, like I was saying, and just kind of, I was hoping to keep it small, like I said, one town, maybe two towns, so that we could do a thorough analysis, but I was hoping that you would consider maybe participating in, I'm gonna call it a pilot project, I guess, that has good and bad connotations, but if you're interested, something we could do.
Okay, that's what I was thinking as well.
What would you need for input on that? No,
What would you?
so it sounds really interesting. What I'm trying to think about is if, go back to our land use folks to say, what would they need to, what kind of data would they need to feed into this to?
I think if your town is interested, the way I envision it working was like we would kind of we'd kind of look at what size development we'd be looking at, right? So like if you want something small, maybe we would approach Habitat for Humanity. Something bigger, maybe Hope and Mercy. We would go to approach their point of contact, get a detailed list of what they're looking for. Do they want a foreclosure? Do they want a certain age, a certain location? And then we would start winnowing down the parcels and the town to say like, you know, these are within the zoning, you know, it meets the zoning requirements for the town, it's close to transportation, this one's vacant, or this one is underutilized, so we'd come up with that list. We would vet it at the town level, right, and then we would make the connection with Habitat, so that Habitat could look at the list and be like, actually, we didn't know that you had something like this that's available, we would be interested. And it's already been pre-vetted with the town, right, so there's it's not, it's less of a surprise, I guess would be a good way to put it. Right, so there's like kind of working on both the supplier, which is the town, and the developer, which would be like Habitat, to kind of connect the two.
The chicken or the egg is what I'm trying to figure out here.
Right.
Are we talking about going to Habitat and Hope to say, here are the things that they're looking to in the towns, and then the town saying, oh, we have this particular parcel? I think for the most part, I know Chester at this point doesn't own a lot of property, so you're sort of, but there might, and maybe there are landlords that want to, but I get sort of this idea of how you even, from the town side, start unless you had Habitat saying, this is what we think we might need. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out, but Chester, I'm not sure is quite ready yet to say, here's our inventory of possible towns, although, of land, although, you know, with the 8-30G, there was a lot of discussion of what would be better because of the other concerns that people were saying. I don't want it here, I want it there, but what is better there than here?
Right. And I think the start of the conversation is to figure out what those organizations are looking for.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So the scope of what you're looking at be town-owned, residential, commercial, everything?
So I don't actually know what Habitat looks for. I keep using Habitat or Hope or
No,
what,
no.
you know.
What would you be prepared to process?
I think, all the above.
So
I think.
if Hope would be interested in adaptive reuse and they were looking for commercial properties of, you know, mid-size commercial properties, would privately owned stuff be in scope for what you'd be prepared to
I envision
filter?
that would be helpful for Habitat because like I said, Habitat can purchase, they have access to LoopNet, to Zillow, they can purchase whatever building they want in our community. So I think what we're trying to do is to both work on the town side, but also be that conduit like Zillow or LoopNet or Realtor.com to like show like, these are the things that the town has. It's private or it could be publicly owned. There's some support or some awareness that these parcels are available in the town. Habitat, you told us that this is what you're looking for, this is what we have, what do you think? And then let's see what they're interested in.
I did, but maybe you answered the question. Are you looking at private properties too? I mean, 'cause you know, we picked out in Bassett, there was a proposed text amendment where we had like 10 different properties, but they were all private properties.
So I think for this, it's an exercise, right? And it's not something that we would advertise per se, you know, so like the list and the map that we come up with, it's something that we're working in-house on, right? I think there would be benefit to include private parcels as well. And, you know, how Habitat goes about acquiring that parcel, I think that's on them. But I think being able to show that these are the parcels in the town that meet the criteria that the developer, just look at them as a developer, you know, is interested in acquiring. There's no guarantee that we give them a list of 10 properties and they'll be like, actually, we're not interested. So that is a possibility with this exercise. But I think for our awareness, it would be helpful to kind of go ahead and look through the parcel data and see what it is we have and see if we have something like that could work with Mercy or Hope, even if it's private. But whether or not we advertise that at the end, that's something that I think we're several steps beyond that.
I think the concept of some sort of data-driven matchmaking that you're describing is potentially really useful. But I could, again, thinking about how would I go back to our land use folks and say, is this something you'd be interested in participating in as a pilot? I could use just like one level more, understanding it's a concept and a pilot, so not a full-blown proposal, but just some sort of sketch of how it would work and what would the inputs and outputs be.
Would it be helpful for me to reach out to, I'll just say Hope, Habitat, and Mercy, and to see what it is they're looking for? And then that would be the proposal, like, hey, this is the criteria that they gave me and this potential exercise. Would you like to go further? Would that be the next
I think it
step?
would help for the town to know what they need, and then maybe
the
that.
town side of it, I think.
Yeah, it'd be hard to know.
Right,
I
and
also-
I don't,
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I think that it would be, if Rivercog's taking the lead and talking with those entities to find out what it is that they want, but then for you to identify parcels that are for sale in the towns, to then, I'd be happy to talk with you once you've said, oh, I see blah, blah, blah property is for sale. Could this go there? You know, based on what it is that Habitat or Hope is looking to do. I think it would be hard for me from the town side to show you what's for sale because I don't know what it is that Habitat's looking for. But if you did that legwork to maybe you have a list of what's for sale first, you show that to Habitat and say, you guys look through this, are any of these a good fit? I don't know.
I think, I'm hearing what you're saying. I think probably doing it both ways would be good, because I think the more exhaustive process is regardless if it's for sale or if it's, like if it's available on realtor.com or something like that, like this parcel is something that they'd be interested in, but it's privately owned. You know, I think having that information is helpful. We don't necessarily have to act on it. I think we're very many steps removed from that. I think with your blessing, I'd like to reach out to those 3 organizations, figure out what they're interested in, and then kind of bring that to you and kind of get an idea of if you'd like to take the next step and compare that with what you have in the town.
I think it's a great idea. I think for economic development, it'd be a wonderful idea to have all that information too.
Right.
You know, then you'd know what you have there for other things to build on there. If it's not, you know, necessarily useful for affordable housing, but could do something else for the town. Why not? It's great information.
And it was in the SEDS, the economic development document that we put together, parcel by parcel, like these are the parcels that are available, they're in this zoning, they're this size, they're vacant or underutilized, and it kind of created a map for the whole region that kind of outlines, if you were a would-be developer, you could just look at the map and be like, actually, I didn't know that parcel was available, and
Oh, I haven't seen that.
and
Okay. Great.
So maybe for next meeting, if you could just take what you said and just do a half page and we could send it out to everybody. We're a little bit late in attendance on this meeting. I'm not even sure if we have a quorum to do anything official, but I think what we're hearing is there's interest.
Okay.
So we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting and take the next step. Yeah, it does sound interesting.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, second?
No, you don't.
I didn't think so.
No one's being a stickler about it. I think so.
Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.
Michael.
Bye, everybody online.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Your email in there for me, because I need to put you on my phone in case